You are listening to a bonus episode.
Bonus!
And this isn't your typical One Nation Under Crime.
But we're not really typical.
No. We are calling these episodes USBS, where we discuss the historical BS of the U.S. We're going to cover historical topics in the U.S. that are interesting or that I find during my research for ONUC that we don't have time to discuss. Or it could be things that you send us that you want us to cover, that you want our opinions and topics on. We know that you always want that. And that's what we're doing here.
There you go. You're welcome.
So, as a bit of a holiday treat for you all, if you listened to the end of our episode this week, then you know what's happening. We are going to have a bonus episode of USBS every week from now until the end of the year.
Merry Christmas. Happy Hanukkah. Happy New Year.
And then
Happy
after
Kwanzaa.
that,
What did I forget? Anything?
nothing. Just say happy holidays. That gets all of it.
Happy.
So after that, these episodes are going to move over to our Patreon where you can go and subscribe and you can get the first ones that come out there too. So,
Woohoo!
I'm Kayla.
And I'm Leah.
And let's get into it. If you saw the title of our bonus episode this week, you might be thinking, interesting. But it is. Our sources for this week are history.com and constitutioncenter.org. And as I said, when you saw the topic, you were thinking, weird. So where did the term Benedict Arnold come from? Other than being an actual person, why do we associate the name with someone who is a traitor?
I know.
How did one man's name become an idiom hundreds of years later, and it's still used every day? Benedict Arnold was born January 14th of 1741 in Norwalk, Connecticut. He was one of several Benedict Arnolds in his family. Both his father and his great-grandfather shared the same name. His great-grandfather was a governor of Rhode Island. And Arnold's mom, Hannah Waterman King, came from a family that was, quote, a descendant of the Rhode Island equivalent of royalty.
Ooh.
His father had been one of the colony founders, and he might have been suave enough to snag his mother, but he was described as a drunk. And he ruined the family by squandering away the wealth they were given due to bad business dealings.
Oh, dear.
Arnold attended school for a little bit of time at Canterbury, and while he attended, 2 of his sisters and 1 of his brothers died from yellow fever.
Ooh.
He was removed from school because the family couldn't afford for him to go anymore. And because of this, young Benedict was a bit of a troublemaker, and his mom could no longer control him. But thankfully for her, her nephews, Daniel and Joshua Lathrop, took in young Benedict as an apprentice in their large apothecary business. Arnold did leave his apprenticeship a couple of times because he was a member of the militia during the French and Indian War, which, for those of you who aren't keeping up with the dates, and I don't blame you, means he was anywhere between the ages of 13 and 23 when he fought in the French and Indian War. In 1759, Arnold's mother died and his father died only 2 years later. Arnold had dreams of opening his own apothecary, so he traveled to Europe. He then purchased the supplies and equipment he needed before establishing his shop in New Haven, Connecticut. There was only one other surviving member of the Arnold family other than Benedict himself, and it was his sister, Hannah. Naturally, he hired her as his assistant to keep an eye on her and to support her however he could.
Be a good big brother.
Right. But Arnold's shop wasn't necessarily on the up and up.
Unfortunately.
He started smuggling and having shady business dealings. Sounds a bit like his dad. And of course, all of this was in contempt with the customs and laws of the crown.
Oh, dear.
Cupid struck Arnold in 1767, and he married a woman named Margaret Mansfield. Together, the couple had 3 sons. Not too many yet. 3's, they still outnumber you. But anyways, most of us know about the Revolutionary War, but for those of you who don't know, who might not have learned the Revolutionary War, we got a lot of listeners in other countries. So if you aren't aware of what the Revolutionary War is, I'll give you a very brief overview of what happened and kind of how everything led to it, because it does take place. Like, the reason that Benedict Arnold is a term used today is because of the events that happened during the Revolutionary War. So, the Revolutionary War, which is also known as the American War for Independence or the American Revolution, began in 1765 and officially ended in 1783. It was a war between the original 13 American colonies and Great Britain. The colonies were fed up with laws and taxes being placed on them without any colonial representation by the British monarchy and Parliament.
No taxation without representation.
Some of the most notable events that contributed to growing tensions in the colonies were the Stamp Act of 1765, which they tried to make all printed documents have to carry a stamp on them, which is just weird. Then there was the Boston Massacre, the Tea Act of 1773, which was a tax on tea to financially assist the struggling British East India Company. I told y'all that would come back. And you might remember this one because of the Boston Tea Party. While all of these were acts of rebellion and not technically war, the war came officially on April 19th of 1775 due to the battles of Lexington and Concord. This is where the shot heard round the world occurred. And for those of you who aren't really familiar with that, the shot heard round the world is essentially what started the entire Revolutionary War. The British say that the Americans did it. The Americans say that the British did it. The world may never know. But it was the first shot.
Somebody just screwed up. Was like, oh wait,
Yeah.
was that me?
I think somebody was like
Oops.
cleaning his gun or something and was like, oh,
was that me? Did I do that?
Oh no.
Oh.
Eventually the French joined the American colonies in war, and then the colonies were able to defeat the British, which achieved independence from Great Britain and officially established the United States of America.
The world turned upside down.
Yes. Before the Revolutionary War broke out, Arnold had become a captain in the governor's 2nd Company of Guards. It was when news spread of the battles of Lexington and Concord that Arnold requested permission from the Massachusetts Committee of Safety to capture Fort Ticonderoga. He partnered with Ethan Allen, no relation to Ethan Allen, which is a furniture store that we know today, and Allen's group known as the Green Mountain Boys to capture the first British garrison at Fort Ticonderoga in upstate New York on May 10th of 1775. Arnold was enraged when the Green Mountain Boys invaded the garrison's stash of rum and proceeded to get completely drunk. The men ignored Arnold's commands completely, and not only did they just ignore him, they only referred to him if they were poking fun at him. As a major general, Arnold went on to serve with honor at the battles of Quebec and Saratoga. During this time, in June of 1775, Arnold's wife died. He started to become known as a bit of a hothead and frequently fought with other officers and Congress as a whole. George Washington understood Arnold's anger issues as a general, but he also valued his tactfulness on the battlefield a bit more than his attitude. We've heard that before. George Washington proposed to the Continental Congress that Benedict Arnold should participate in the campaign to invade Canada under the command of General Philip Schuyler.
We know him.
Arnold and his men left Cambridge for the attack on Quebec in September of 1775. They were marching north through rough wilderness, and winter was quickly approaching. Arnold drafted a letter to John Dyer Mercier, an acquaintance in Quebec, hoping to gain useful intelligence before he and Schuyler arrived to take the city. The letter was given to natives in the Abenaki tribe to pass on to John Hall to give to Mercier. What they didn't know was that John Hall was a French-speaking British deserter who they really shouldn't have been giving that letter to.
Ruh-roh, Raggy.
So instead, the letter fell into the hands of the British, who, now alerted to the impending assault, fortified the city's defenses. On December 31st of 1775, the Battle of Quebec ensued, but things went very poorly for the Americans.
Well, especially for General Montgomery, who caught a bullet in the neck.
Yep, he sure did. Arnold was severely injured. Despite his heroic service, Arnold felt he did not receive the recognition he deserved. We also heard that out of Aaron Burr. He resigned from the Continental Army in 1777 after Congress promoted 5 junior officers above him.
Ooh.
Washington begged him to reconsider after everything he had contributed to the war effort, and Arnold rejoined the Army in time to participate in the defense of central New York from an invading British force under General John Burgoyne. In the battles against Burgoyne, Arnold served under General Horatio Gates, such an interesting name, who was an officer that Arnold...
Wait, was his name Horatio?
Yeah. Horatio. Why?
I'm sorry. It's a bit from the Andy Griffith Show.
Oh.
I'm sorry. You don't care. It just makes me laugh.
This was an officer who Arnold came to hold in contempt, and the feelings were quite mutual. And Gates at one point relieved Arnold of his command. Just bye. Nonetheless, at the Battle of Bemis Heights on October 7th of 1777, Arnold defied Gates' authority and took command of a group of American soldiers whom he led in an assault against the British line. Arnold's attack threw the enemy into disarray and contributed greatly to the American victory. 10 days later, Burgoyne surrendered his entire army at Saratoga. News of the surrender convinced France to enter the war on the side of the Americans.
Ooh, surely he got recognition there.
Once again, Arnold had brought his country a step closer to independence. However, Gates downplayed Arnold's contributions in his official reports and claimed most of the credit for himself. We've heard that before, too. Also, during all of this, Arnold received an injury at Saratoga, and it was the same leg he injured in Quebec. He was temporarily incapable of a field command, and he accepted the position of military governor of Philadelphia in 1778. It was there that his loyalties began to change. During his term as governor, rumors not entirely unfounded circulated through Philadelphia accusing Arnold of abusing his position for personal profit. Questions were also raised about Arnold's courtship and marriage to the young Peggy Shippen, who was 19 years his junior. Peggy was the daughter of a man suspected of loyalist sympathies.
But wait a minute, how old was he at this time? Even though it was 19 years his junior, how old was he?
He was in his 40s. I
I
want to say.
That's not as bad.
Correct. However.
Okay, continue. I'm just saying, 19 years his junior isn't as bad as she was 19 and he was 55. Okay, continue.
So, but yes, that. And then,
I said, her father was suspected
as a loyalist.
Right, wrong.
And he married her. So.
Now, do our listeners all understand what a loyalist is?
Should, but we'll go through it. So a loyalist was essentially someone who just remained loyal to the British crown. They were not fighting in the American Revolution, and if they were fighting for the side of the British. And then patriots are the Americans who are fighting for independence on the other side. So Peggy, her dad was a loyalist who was loyal to the British crown, while Benedict Arnold was a general as a patriot in the Revolutionary War.
There you go.
So
You can see how that could make things a little bit uncomfortable
yes.
at dinner with daddy-in-law.
Arnold and Peggy lived a lavish lifestyle in Philadelphia, accumulating substantial debt with their 5 children, now bringing him to 8 total. Too many. Now, yes, too many.
Whew.
The debt and the resentment Arnold felt over not being promoted faster were motivating factors in his choice to become a turncoat. And turncoat was just a term during that time that essentially meant like you were a turncoat. You were on the Patriot side, which had blue coats, and you were a turncoat, and you went to the British side, who had red coats. Hence, one of the famous things: the red coats are coming. So
You changed your coat color.
Yep. He concluded that his interests would be better served assisting the British than continuing to suffer for an American army he saw as ungrateful. When Arnold was essentially encouraged / forced to rejoin the war, Washington wanted him to come back as a top commander, but instead, Arnold requested command of the Hudson Valley region and the facility of West Point. Told you I'd come back.
Mm-hmm.
This is when Arnold crossed paths with British Major John Andre. Andre was a top aide to British Commander Sir Henry Clinton. He also led the British spy network. The two were introduced and they began corresponding with one another using coded letters. Arnold would arrange for the British to easily take over West Point, which was now under Arnold's command, and the price for this was £20,000 and a spot for Arnold in the British military command.
Pretty sweet for him.
The British thought taking over West Point would give them complete military control over the Hudson Valley. This is when things took a turn. Andre was headed back to meet with the British and give them plans of the takeover, but the ship he was traveling on was forced away by American gunfire. Andre disembarked the ship and had to walk back to British lines disguised as a civilian. And Andre thought he was traveling through an area that the British were in control of. But
that's what he got for thinking.
3 American soldiers confronted him, and he found out he was very wrong.
Ruh-roh.
The American soldiers searched Andre and quickly found all of the information for the plot. And it also incriminated Arnold in treason.
Uh-oh. That is really bad.
And for those who aren't aware what treason is, basically you are helping the other side in war. Like it's
a crime against your company.
Yeah, it's
a country.
Yes, it is a crime against your country for giving information related to something in that respect. So a lot of people who are spies, a lot of times they're charged with treason. So within a month of the two meeting, Andre was executed under order from George Washington for espionage.
Off with his head.
As for Arnold, well, he fled to the British side hoping for asylum, but he wasn't necessarily welcomed there either.
Uh-oh.
Arnold soon became one of the most reviled figures in U.S. history.
Yeah.
Weirdly enough, his treason became his final service to the American Revolution. Americans had grown frustrated with the slow progress towards independence and their numerous battlefield defeats. However, word of Arnold's treason against them re-energized the Patriots' falling morale. Arnold did achieve the British command that he was looking for, and he led attacks in Virginia and Connecticut. But the Revolutionary War officially ended with the signing of the Treaty of Paris in 1783. Arnold fled to England after the war was over. He then died in London on June 14th, 1801, at age 60. One Massachusetts paper noted his passing with one line.
Oh, no.
In England, Brigadier General Benedict Arnold, notorious throughout the world. The British regarded him with ambivalence while his former countrymen despised him. And back in 1781, Benjamin Franklin wrote to Marquis de Lafayette about Arnold's treason. After American agents seized a letter that said Arnold only received £5,000, not what he was expecting from the 20,000
No.
for his acts. Franklin compared Arnold to Judas
Oh, my.
and said it was, quote, a miserable bargain, especially when one considers the quantity of infamy he has acquired to himself and entailed on his family.
Mm-hmm. And I was going to ask about what I don't know. I mean, I knew why Benedict Arnold, why we used that. What about his family? Do you have a follow-up on his family? Like,
A little bit.
okay, good.
Following his death, Arnold's memory lived on in the land of his birth, where his name became synonymous with the word traitor.
Mm-hmm.
In popular culture now, the words Benedict Arnold became synonymous with treason or becoming a traitor. And at West Point, Arnold's name was erased from a series of monuments that honor the generals of the Revolutionary War. So, now you know the genesis of the term Benedict Arnold. His family did continue, from everything that I saw, Arnold was kind of a common last name at the time, so it wasn't too difficult for some to kind of like scoot under the radar. But
Like, did they stay in the U.S.?
I couldn't find whether they left with him or not. I would imagine they would if they were still alive, because
I mean, because they were
8
like
kids.
it was such an established family, like his extended family, especially. But you know,
a lot of his family at the time, from what I read, were lumped together with loyalists. So I do know that a lot of them had a really tough time after the war was over with that. Now, whether his actual family left and went with him isn't really known.
Yeah.
But he did die in 1801.
Yeah.
And he was 60.
In England.
Yes, he died in England. He never came back to the United States.
I mean, I know he better not.
I mean, well, and then the other thing that happened is that a lot of the British command blamed Arnold for Andre's death.
Well, yeah.
And they said, like, you know, basically, you killed him. Which, I mean...
Well, I mean, he really didn't, but, I mean, it's not his fault that his shit...
Yeah.
I mean, you know...
To be fair, he really didn't, you know, do that. Andre's the one that got caught.
Right. I mean, if you're a spy, that's the risk that you take.
Right. So, I mean...
Sorry.
Yeah, I don't get it. But then on the same hand, it's like, did you really expect that you were going to be an American soldier and then just go over to the British side and everything was going to be fine?
Everybody was going to just welcome you with open arms, no suspicion at all?
None. Like, that's what's so weird to me. And you were, like, you fought directly under George Washington.
Yeah, like, you were really high up, dude.
Like, what did you think was going to happen here? But, I mean, he did continue, and he was in British command, and he took attacks on Virginia and Connecticut. So, I mean, he at least had some little bit of notoriety in that sense, I guess.
I guess.
But, I mean...
His name was Mud.
Yeah.
Which has a backstory, too.
Mm-hmm.
That I can't remember.
It does.
But it does have
It has
backstory.
a similar story to Benedict Arnold.
Yes, it does.
It was because the last name of the guy was Mud.
Right.
And he had written some letters or something like that. It was very similar to that.
Yeah.
But yes. it's very interesting. And now, a lot of times you'll hear in pop culture references, you'll hear that someone is a Benedict Arnold. And yeah, that's where it all comes from today, which is it's very interesting sometimes to hear where things come from. Like we figured out what limelight comes from, like someone
Mhm.
being in the limelight.
And if you don't know, now you know.
And what else have we figured out so far? We did discuss the Mad Hatter, what that
Yes.
comes from, and a lot of different things like that. So it's kind of interesting to see where these little things
The
come
term
from in the
hooker.
past. Yeah, the term hooker. Figured out where that came from. Um, just a lot of different things that we
I mean, I
learn
kind of already knew
on this show.
Mad
Parts of
Hatter
it.
and
Yeah.
hooker.
Well, our listeners might not have.
That's right. I enjoy little quirky facts like that.
Yeah. So it is fun. And, I'm sure a lot of people, because like they said, that he was still kind of revered for the British as like helping them in the
Mhm.
war. So I'm
I
sure,
mean, they didn't win.
yeah, right. But I'm sure some people still, like in Britain,
They
thought
appreciate
of
him sticking
him.
out his neck.
Yeah. They like thought, oh, he's not that, like he's not a bad guy. So it's kind of funny because also another thing that I was thinking while I was writing this is because we do have some listeners that are in the UK.
Mhm.
And
I mean, y'all, I'm half Scottish. I'm just
right.
saying.
So
Half Scottish.
what I found funny is that like, sometimes, especially in the US, so this is kind of just an example that I notice. So in the US, we kind of have like some regions will have some history information there and some regions won't. It just kind of depends on like what region you're in. Like, yes, we have US history, but it really kind of depends on what US history is there. Like, if you're reading textbooks, say from the North, they could be slightly different on the Civil War than what ones in the South would be. And they've shown that, like, side
Hmm.
by side comparisons, that they are slightly different. And so I wonder, like, if you're a student in the UK, like, what did you learn about the Revolutionary War?
Well, and I think some things I know that things are covered more in depth. I mean, mom,
Mm-hmm.
mother's from Scotland. Things are covered more in depth here. Number one, you know, in the U.S., we have a whole year that is devoted to U.S. history
Mm-hmm.
because we're in the U.S.
Mm-hmm.
And in fourth grade here in Alabama, we have Alabama history.
Mm-hmm.
We don't have Texas history
Right.
in Alabama. So, I mean, it's going to be regional.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, so there's going to be different things that are taught, and it's not going to be as in depth
Mm-hmm.
just because that's our country. And, you need to learn your country's origin, so it's not going to be as in
Right.
depth.
But I wonder, just from a different perspective, not even really in depth of that perspective, I wonder if when they learn about the Revolutionary War, I wonder under what lens they're teaching it. Does
Sure.
that make sense?
Yeah, yeah,
Like,
yeah, yeah.
how do they paint
Well,
Americans?
just like in Wicked, I love when the wizard sings "Wonderful."
Mm-hmm.
Uh, where I come from, we tell all kinds of lies. We call it history.
Right.
A man's called a traitor or a liberator.
Mm-hmm.
A rich man's a thief or philanthropist.
It's always just curious to me as to what.
Look, there's three sides to every story.
Right.
Your version, my version, and the truth.
Right.
And that's just how it is. And I mean, there can be three people that see the exact, or we even talked about this. There can be three people, well, an entire congregation that hears the same sermon, the exact same sermon.
Right. And each person's going to say something different out of it.
Uh-huh.
But I wonder, so in Hamilton, one of the things at the very, 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 very end, after Hamilton is shot and killed, in the musical, that was when Burr said, "So now I'm like the villain in your history."
Uh-huh.
Like, basically,
Nobody remembers
no one's
anything
going to
else
talk
I
about,
did.
right. No one's going to talk about my side. They're only going to remember that I'm the villain in your history. We all know Burr shot first. Anyways,
Please don't start.
I don't care what you say. First shot first. I'm just saying the fact that when Hamilton handed him the gun, he said, "Be careful, it's loaded." Really? Like, really? Anyways, but I wonder a lot of things like that of
Yeah.
how things
It would be
are
interesting.
told. So if you are from the UK and you do know how
Give us
y'all
a
were,
little glimpse.
yeah, let me know how
we're
y'all.
seriously curious. We're not like,
No, like I really do
we're
want to know.
America, USA,
America.
I mean, yeah. I
No.
mean, we are patriotic and we are Americans,
Right, but
like
we
I
can.
said,
You're
I'm-
Scottish.
yeah, I mean, like I said, I'm half Scottish. I am curious to see how it is represented, and in France,
Mm-hmm.
how is your part portrayed? I mean, because you guys stepped in, Lafayette,
But then I wonder
and
because
then how are we portrayed after we didn't come and help
that's what I was about to
you?
say.
I know there was some bad blood for a while.
That's what I want. That's what I was about to say too. Is I wonder because I'm sure during the Revolution there might be in France there might be positive things about the American Revolution and their contributions. Like I'm sure it's very heavy on their contributions to it,
Yeah.
but I'm sure that when it came to the French Revolution, they're like, then they just abandoned us.
And then there were no Americans.
Yeah. So but I truly do wonder because I think somehow I just wonder how because in British like in British history books or in the UK, if they have kind of similar ways that we have things, it's not the same way that we say
Mm.
it. Like it and this is absolutely no offense to anyone in Great Britain, but I'm sure it comes across as that the colonies were ungrateful. You know what I mean? Like it because you're not going to see something there that is in favor of the American Revolution per se. You might, it's not going to be painted in such a glorious light as it is here.
Well, and I don't know necessarily glorious light, but I mean, I think now that we are so far removed from it,
Mm-hmm.
I think that it could be very factually laid out
Mm-hmm.
with no passion
Mm-hmm.
to it, just laid out. This was happening, so this happened.
I also wonder how so those countries obviously have been around
Couple years.
centuries before ours. So like for us, that's a big part of our history, like the American history. Like literally we have a class and most of it is just Revolutionary era. So I wonder if like for them, like the American Revolution is just like a little blip on their radar and then they just move on.
Yeah. Oh yeah, it is.
Well,
I mean, because I've told you, I think we've said it on the podcast. Like when I've been to Scotland, we'll be in a castle, and I remember vividly.
Oh yeah.
One of the towers. I looked at the steps, and it was stone steps. We were in a castle. The stone steps. I looked at them, and the center of the steps were worn, and I was like,
That's
those
so weird.
steps
Yeah.
are older than our country.
Which and I've said before that some people that listen to our podcast might also listen to and that's why we drink and on the show. They say that every time they do a story on anything that's
Mhm.
like because was a tour guide in, is it Gettysburg or Richmond? They were a tour guide there for a long time.
That would be cool.
And so anytime they do a story on anything that's before like the 1760s, they're like, my mind cannot comprehend that there is something like older than that.
Yeah, because that was pretty
like-
stinking old.
Because they covered an episode once and they were like, it took place in 500. I was like, oh my gosh. Like, because to us, like, our history, technically for American history, starts 1776. Like,
Yeah.
it's it's crazy, but yeah, so I wonder if let us know, guys.
I'm
I
curious.
am very curious as to how y'all learn. And
I
in
mean, I have family over there. I could
right.
probably ask them.
Well, and in a lot of different countries, like, I just wonder kinda how
Mm.
things 'cause we take world history. There is one year that we do a
Yeah.
world history class, and we learn about, like, the Ming dynasties, and we learn about a lot of different things.
Mm.
We do learn about the French Revolution, we learn about the
Mhm.
monarchy, we learn about a lot of things, which I'm sure some people might be surprised that we do learn those things. Like,
Mm.
we know about King Henry, like, we know about Napoleon Bonaparte, we know a lot about history, we know a lot about the Spanish conquistadors, like, we do study that stuff,
It sticks with some of us. It
but
doesn't stick with others.
right, but we only study it for 1 school
Right.
year,
Right.
and then after that, it's kind of all American history,
Yeah.
and each grade is kind of like a separate piece of it,
Mhm.
and so until like the way that our school system goes is it's kind of a different after you cover, Alabama history, then you cover world history, then you get to like US history. And then kind of after that, it's like specific eras of history. And then your
Well,
last year is like
and
economics
government.
and government is your very last year kind of that rounds out
Mhm.
history. And so it's just very interesting just to kind of see how different people, what different countries takes are like in North Korea. I'm sure there's nothing
Yeah.
about like, and not to say anything negative, but just knowing like how censored a lot of
Mhm.
things are there. I'm sure there is nothing about the American Revolution because in North Korea they don't want people to get ideas about
Right.
revolution.
Right.
I mean, it really is.
Interesting.
It's very interesting, and I just wonder. Just I always like to know how things are perceived and different because you and I
Or
both
presented.
right, you and I are both people that like we can be presented an argument, but also be able to see someone else's perspective
Yes.
and like to a point of not just see that person's perspective, but like understand where
Yeah.
they're coming
Well,
from.
we we will have discussions with each other,
Mhm.
and you will like just this past week we were having a discussion, and you were telling me your points, your points, your
Mhm.
points, and then I came back with counterpoints, and I agreed with yours,
I
but
know.
I came back with counterpoints, and I'm like, look, I'm just playing devil's advocate. I'm just coming back with the other points. I can see this other side, and I mean that's just what we do.
Yeah. And
Try to be open minded, and just could this be a possibility?
like and we've discussed it before, we are not a politics podcast. We don't like to talk about
No.
politics.
Or money.
Those are just things that we stay out of. But even as far as politics goes, I mean, we are not unknowing of the other side of whatever our beliefs are, their
Mhm.
perspective. Like we're not blind now. There are a lot of people who are there, and I will say it. This is the only political thing that I will say about things is you need to be loyal to policy, not party.
I will agree with that.
You need to be because I think not to get into it, but I think a lot of people are very caught up on party rather than the policies the policies that they're actually voting for. And that is on all sides. That is not just a specific side. That is
Absolutely.
on all sides. And we do have a two-party system, thanks 1824. But, we do have a two-party system and it wasn't designed to be that way. It wasn't ever designed to be that until things changed. And which is funny because a lot of people from other countries will kind of like see the US and they're like, it's funny to them because they're like, they don't
Mhm.
understand, you know, especially places where the queen, I mean, like you have the crown, like that's just how things
Mhm.
go. And here we do have a democracy, but it goes all the way back to when um, the king said, you know, are you going to replace every time someone's in charge? Like, how? how does that happen? And it is true because if you pay attention to anything political in the United States, if there is a new president, it takes about 2 years
Yeah.
for really their policies to come forward because, and it's, again, it's not to say any side. Those 2 years, it's like that president is undoing things that he didn't like that the previous president
Right.
did. And then it's like you finally get to year 3 and those policies are coming into place. Then reelection occurs. And so
Right.
it's like then they switch gears again. So I mean, it is very true. And it's just like in Hamilton, he says, oh, are they going to keep replacing whoever's in charge? If so, who's next?
Yeah.
And that
John
was,
Adams.
yeah, that was
Good
when
luck.
John Adams came in after George Washington.
Mhm.
And no one wanted George Washington to go because
Right.
that was all they knew. And that's when he was like, I have to leave. I have to teach, like they say, I have to teach them how to say goodbye.
Yeah.
Because if I don't do it, then I'm not setting the precedent that we laid out.
Right.
And so, Lee and I are both in that way of like, we can see the other side. We can see where you're coming from. If you present us with a valid argument, we can see the other side.
We may not agree with your
Right.
side,
We might not agree with
but
something.
we'll listen to you. If you
Right.
make sense, we'll listen to you.
And if you have, I'll say this all the time, if you, because me and my boyfriend talk about a lot of different things, but I've always said, if you have a valid argument and you come forward to me with a perspective that I have not thought of before, you very well could change my mind because I'm not so, I don't feel as though I'm so like bogged down in things that I can't say, oh, that does make sense.
Mm-hmm.
Like, a lot of people have issues over the death penalty. People have, because that is, for those who don't know, we do have the death penalty in the United States, depending on the state that you're in. And a lot of people have a lot of conflicting beliefs about the death penalty. And I mean, there are a lot of convincing arguments for both sides.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's just another one of those things of I was very much one way for a very long time. And then I was given another perspective and I went, oh, that makes sense. Because somebody gives you something to think about.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when you go, oh,
You know something my mind will never be
Interesting.
changed on?
Hmm.
Going around in caves. I will never
no.
go in caves. I don't understand.
No.
I don't understand
Mm-mm.
the pull to do that.
Mm-mm.
Why do people
Mm-mm.
go in caves?
So many people go missing in those.
Why? Why do these
It's
people want to
crazy.
do that? It's dark.
Like
Things live there.
spelunking?
Yes.
When people
yeah.
jump down into them?
No. You don't know what's down in there, you crazy people.
Oh, gosh.
My nephews have done that.
People are so funny. And,
And
yeah.
I tell them, or skydiving. Nope. Just
Oh,
tell me
I can't
after you've done it.
skydive.
Tell me after you've done it. Don't tell me before.
No,
Tell me after.
we had a family friend for a long time that had an unfortunate event skydiving, and
Don't tell me.
No, I won't. I will never skydive after
Mm-mm.
knowing about that. So, well,
Rabbit Trail. You're welcome.
we've reached the end of our very first bonus episode of USBS. We hope that you enjoyed it. I hope that you kind of liked this kind of departure from true crime for a little bit, even though I guess treason is still a crime.
It is a big crime. Don't
It's
do it.
still,
It's
we've
not
got
as bad as killing.
Right. We've got other things that I do have kind of coming up that we're going to talk about in our next few bonus episodes that are kind of still around this time period that are very interesting. So we will see how those go. But, as we say always, you can always find us anywhere that you can find us.
You can find us
honestly,
anywhere you can find us.
you can, we have our website, onenationundercrime.com. You can always reach us kind of anywhere from there. There's links for everything. We're at ONUC Pod on Twitter, and then One Nation Under Crime, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube. Everything is on there.
All the things.
All the things that are there. And we hope that you enjoyed this bonus episode. Like I said, eventually we will take that to Patreon. So if you would
and who
like,
doesn't want more Kayla and Leah?
right? And if you would like to help with the cost of making the show, you can also go to Patreon and you can sign up to be a Patreon donor there. There are different levels and they do have quite fun names. So please go there. And also, like I said before, we're going to do these bonus episodes through the end of the year. And then eventually those will be moving over to Patreon. So we appreciate you tuning in for the inaugural case, the inaugural topic, really. Yeah.
Inaugural episode.
Yeah. We
Yeah.
appreciate you joining us for the inaugural episode of USBS.
USBS.
Very cleverly named on my part, I will say. Not patting myself on the back or anything, but
You are so clever
here I
and
am.
so humble.
I know. I'm really humble. It's one of my best qualities.
If you do say so yourself.
If I do say so myself. So yeah, we appreciate you tuning into us this week. We will see you again next week with more BS.
From the US.
And I hope that you enjoyed all of it because we like it. And we will see you here. And remember, even with the BS, there's still no liberty and justice for all, even here.
Even here.
So we'll see you then.
Bye.
Bye, guys.